Go ahead.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Again, we are the Washington State Association of Head Start and ECAP. We are a membership-based organization representing Head Start and ECAP providers, parents, and of course children. We're a C3 organization. We are delighted today to have Representative Sharon Shewmake, who's a candidate in the 42nd Legislative District. By the way, I forgot to introduce myself again, just for sake of this. I'm Joel Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of the Association. We've been doing a series of candidate forums focused on families with young children. Each of the forums are recorded and they're made publicly available on various digital platforms. We'll also send you a link to it so you can share and disseminate as you like. Each forum has been about 30 minutes and we are asking the same set of questions to each candidate, so that's fair. And if there's time at the end, we'll also make some room for questions from some of the attendees that we have joining us. So thank you, Representative Shewmake, for joining us. Really appreciate it. And I just thought we'd start off by just asking you to introduce yourself and why you decided to join us tonight. And thank you. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you so much for having me. The preschool people are my favorite people. So I'm Sharon Shewmake. I live in Bellingham up here in Whatcom County. And I ran for the first time in 2018, never thinking that I'd run for office, on basically two issues. And well, three issues really. One is affordable housing, but the other two issues are things that I think about when I think about my kids. So one is thinking of smart ways to address climate change that are cost effective. This is what I do in my professional life. And then the other one is early learning, because early learning is frankly one of the best investments we can make. For every $1 we spend on birth through 5 programs, we get about $7 to $9 worth of benefits. It's good for kids. They have higher wages throughout their life. Parents have higher wages. But we also see that it's good for taxpayers as well, that when we get at developmental delays early, it can save money on special ed and K through 12. Sometimes they just completely disappear. We also find that for some kids, preschool can actually reduce incarceration rates, which, you know, if you've been a preschool teacher and you've seen the magic of preschool, you kind of understand why teaching a kid to sit and listen and be part of a class is just a crucial part of kind of the socio-economic, socio-emotional learning, right? And so those kids that sit and listen when they're 3 and 4, they end up being able to get more out of their K through 12 education, maybe even go on to higher ed, and they're just less likely to get involved in the criminal justice system. And so when you think about that about half of that $7 to $9 worth of benefits for every $1 spent, when you think about that being about half of that is the reduced cost of incarceration. And so it's this moral reason. As a mom, I'm not okay with someone sitting in prison because they didn't learn how to sit when they were 3. But also, it just makes financial sense as well. So I've been working on getting better access to preschool, on making sure that our preschool markets work. And some of the people on this call, I really, really value their expertise. And I listen to them as much as possible and kind of basically do whatever David Webster tells me to do in Olympia.
Cool. Thank you, Sharon. I'm going to turn it over to Yuval, who's sort of emceeing our forums. Go ahead, Yuval.
Thank you. So our warm-up question is, since our forum is focused on young children and families, what was your favorite children's book growing up and why?
So it's my favorite children's book growing up is not my favorite children's book now, but it was A Little Engine That Could. I was just obsessed with it. My mom actually taught me how to read because she was so sick of reading that book to me. If I had to pick a favorite book now, it might be the Octonauts books.
I remember The Little Engine That Could as a child as well. Like, my mom read that to me a lot. So the next set of questions will be asked between some of our parents. And so first up will be April, who is one of our parent leaders.
Hi there. So I heard you talk a lot about the benefits of early learning. I'd like to know, what is your definition of early learning?
Oh man, it's all the birth through 5 programs. So that $7 to $9, that actually comes from high quality preschool for 3 and 4 year olds. But we also see that are pretty big benefits in terms of just, sometimes sending a midwife the day after a baby's born. I have 2 kids. One was born here at St. Joe's in Whatcom County. The other one, because my husband was born in England. And so just in England, the day after I came home from the hospital, a midwife came to my house. She kind of checks my scar, made sure I was okay, kind of chilled me out a little bit. But also she was checking to make sure that we weren't putting the baby in danger, that I didn't have postpartum depression, that breastfeeding was, going to plan, or if it wasn't going to plan, we could come up with a plan. And then there were all these services available. There were some continuous visits from community health workers. And this was just so different from what I experienced in America, where 6 weeks later I had a doctor's appointment, and thankfully it was my second kid, but it was just like, hope you didn't have postpartum depression, like we didn't have that support. And that is also something that the evidence, it comes from a different source, but that is also something that's pretty cost effective, is some of these services towards new mothers and for new babies, in terms of kind of avoiding disabilities, avoiding problems. And then also, the pregnancy books often end at giving birth, right? Like they forgot to tell you about those first 6 months, which for me were dark. New babies are tough and nobody talks to you about that. So if you don't have that social safety net, if you don't have that line of support, it's way too hard, and it shouldn't be that hard. We can do better.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anna?
Yes. Good evening, Sharon.
Hey.
So my question is, research shows that investments in comprehensive early childhood education pay off particularly for disadvantaged children and families. ECAP is a high-quality, comprehensive early learning program that serves some of the most at-risk families. Do you support increasing ECAP funding? Why or why not?
Yeah, that was some of the work that we did. I mean, the rates were just too low. They're still a little bit low. It's figuring out the money. And so one of the things that I think we should be looking at is a capital gains tax on some of our wealthiest earners who are making money by selling more than $100,000 worth of stocks. I mean, frankly, if you're making money on stocks, on money that you've invested, that's great. I have no ill will towards you, but this is a little bit different from labor income. It's making money off of things that the community is building and work that the community is building. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of put like 7% of that back to that next generation, right? And that's investment. The biggest bang for our buck right now is investment in programs like ECAP, and also expanding access to ECAP, because there's a lot of people that could really benefit from it that don't have access, and they're not really that different from the families that do have access.
Thank you.
I like that as our next tagline, the biggest bang for your buck.
It is. No, the economics of preschool are just like, like I'm an economist, right? But like I'm an environmental economist. So I wasn't, I didn't know how the answer to everything. And like the economics of preschool it's stupid that we don't invest more.
Thank you. Our next question is, childcare providers are some of the lowest paid workers, oftentimes making less than parking lot attendants and dog walkers, while families struggle to afford and find affordable care. What will you do to make childcare more affordable for families and increasing wages and benefits?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to what we value. Right now, like if we all had to pay for K through 12 education, that would be unaffordable too. But the reason why that everyone gets a free K through 12 education is that we came together and we said, all right, well, we're going to do this as a society because this pays off in our labor market, and these are good investments in our kid. Also, when, we need the next generation to take care of us when we're old and continue society and do all this work, right? But if you have a baby in your 20s, you don't have all that money saved up for preschool. It hits you at a time where you're not earning that much, right? And so that's one of the tricky parts of it. So I think we need to expand what we think of as education. I think it needs to include preschool. And once we get that kind of more in there, then we're going to start seeing that we need to pay people more to attract them to these businesses. Right now, a lot of preschool teachers are basically doing preschool because they have a kid and it helps them fund that, right? I know I have at least one preschool teacher that's why she's a preschool teacher. And so we need to be able to attract more people, and that's going to involve paying them more. And it's my job to figure out how to pay them more.
Thank you. Our next question will be asked by Crystal.
Hi, Sharon.
Hey.
All right. Only 5% of Washington State's eligible families receive home visiting from federal, state, and local funding, leaving many families unserved. What are your plans to support pregnant moms and families with newborn children? And are you also willing to work towards expanding policies around family leave, early ECAP, and home visiting?
Yeah, home visiting, I mean, that's what I experienced in the UK, right? That's an incredible program. It's an incredible resource. We absolutely should be investing in things that have these high cost benefit ratios and are setting the next generation up for success. That's a no-brainer when the economics are behind it, and it's the moral thing to do, right? It's for our kids. One of the things that came up when we started talking about expanding home visiting as a pilot project, a universal home visiting program, is that there was a lot of distrust. People were worried that it wouldn't really be optional. And so I think we need to work on that trust a little bit, to try and get that money in and to make people realize that, you know, they're not going to come to your home if you don't want it, but some people didn't really believe that, and they were still worried about that. So the building those lines of communication, some pilot projects, I think is a smart next move there.
Okay, well, thank you. And then I have one more question. So how familiar, I guess, are you with special education, special needs children? Are you like, do you have a lot of background? Have you done a lot of research, especially within our own county?
I have a cousin who's special needs. He was a few years younger than me, so we kind of grew up together.
Okay.
I don't have a ton of experience with special needs children. Generally, I have another friend who has a special needs daughter. But it's, you know, everyone deserves to have dignity, right? And
Yeah.
I think of it as kind of a, you don't know if your kid's going to be special needs or not, and it's really hard to deal with on your own. And that's when we need to come together as a village and support one another, right? I think of it as like a social insurance program.
And are you familiar in Whatcom County, the shortage for high quality programs to care for children with special needs?
I mean, this is something that I would talk to David Webster about and figure out how do we solve that.
Okay, thank you. So do you support increasing programs to help children be able to get into these programs and high quality care?
Yeah, if that's something that we need, I'd love to talk more about
Okay.
that and figure out how to do this.
Great, well, thank you.
Our next question is, prior to COVID-19, 1 in 11 children were homeless. Due to the pandemic, we have seen an increase in homeless children and families. What will you do to ensure children have a safe and stable housing?
Yeah, we need to build more affordable housing. The affordable housing is frankly another good investment. You can't do everything else if you don't have a stable place for your kids. Part of the affordable housing crisis is we're not building enough housing at market rate, but we also cut the housing trust fund, and that's made it really hard for people to get into affordable housing. So we need to support those families. Sometimes when we don't support them, we see that the consequences are more expensive, right? That putting kids into foster care because their parents lost housing is actually kind of an expensive and traumatic thing to happen. And so it would be much better if we could keep those families together, but make sure that they have a secure place so they can get that start and get back on their feet.
Thank you. What will you do to ensure every child has access to the best available medical and mental and dental care possible?
I don't sit on the healthcare committee, so I don't know all the ins and outs of this as much as I should. But I certainly support better access to medical, dental, and I'd also include mental health care in there as well.
Thank you. Our next question will be asked by April.
Early learning is about 1% of the state's budget. In your opinion, is the state of Washington investing sufficiently in early childhood education?
No. I teach at college students, right? And sometimes they ask me like, well, we need more money in college. And I was like, yeah, you do. But you know where the biggest bang for your buck is? It's preschool. It's early learning. You guys are the ones that made it. And so if we're thinking about what our priorities are, Early learning is something that, breaks cycles of intergenerational poverty. We owe it. It's cost effective. We owe it to the next generation.
Thank you. Nearly 1 in 5 children do not get enough to eat in the US. What is your plan to ensure all children and youth get the nutrition they require?
Yeah, so I've been working a lot with the food banks. We had a Whatcom Food Fighters meeting where we brought them all together and we heard what their issues were, what the pipeline problems are. And so this has been important to me, hunger issues. A lot of times there's also really great collaboration with some of our local farmers, being able to bring them in and work with food banks, or the Bellingham schools have done a great job there as well. But fundamentally, the reason we have hunger is because we have poverty, right? It's not just needing access to food banks, it's access to rent, it's low wages, it's all of that. And so we have to, if you can relieve the cost of childcare, then that means that you have more money for school, right? And so we have to look at protecting those that are most vulnerable, and we have to make sure that we're raising wages and we're providing affordable housing and options for those who are really struggling right now. The lack of food is frankly, a symptom of something much worse.
Thank you. How will you ensure that all children and youth have access to high quality, safe, and supervised before, after, and summer programming? Before school, after school, and summer programming.
We have some incredible partners there in terms of the after school and the summer and before school and summer programming. And we're starting to, so the education community has always known that we need more of this. The labor community has always known that we need more of this. We're also hearing it from businesses. They're saying that childcare is one of the biggest impediments to opening and expanding businesses in our area, is that if you don't have a safe place to keep your kids, then your workers just aren't, they're dealing with various schools and everything, and getting kids back and forth. And so it's really hard to have them concentrated and focused if their kids aren't safe. I've said over and over again, and to my caucus, that there's no recovery without childcare. There just isn't. We're already seeing that 1 in 4 women is thinking about stepping back or reducing their hours in the work. 1 in 4 working women, right? And that has tremendous impacts on our labor market. So we have to solve this. It's going to take money. That's always been what's lacking, is money. If we can raise the rates, then more people will provide them, right? But right now we don't have the rates high enough so that people are willing to come in and do that work.
Thank you. Our last question will be asked by Joel.
Well, so I wanted to get back to revenue and kind of get your thoughts in the next legislative session. How are you planning on tackling the budget? You mentioned earlier that you consider progressive revenue. We're going to have some kind of a budget deficit because of the slowdown of the economy. How are you thinking about closing that deficit, and tell us more about progressive revenue and what role that might play?
So I support a capital gains tax. I've been saying that since 2018. It's a tax that Seattle pays. Very few people in Whatcom County would pay it. We have to make sure that it doesn't unfairly burden farmers and some other interest groups. But the proposals that were coming out of the House last year were pretty reasonable, and I thought kind of hit that right. That's not going to solve our immediate budget needs. Our immediate budget needs are going to need revenue sooner than that. And so I've been having some discussions with some of my colleagues about a green recovery bond. So one of the things so a lot of the taxes that we have at our disposal are regressive taxes, right? We could increase the sales tax, but that falls on poor people, right? That makes the problems worse for some people. Hopefully the federal government comes and does the right thing, which is send money to states and local governments who are really good at spending that money. When you have an economic crisis, you're trying to get money out the door. That's how you get that stimulus. That's how you get people back to work. And it's actually kind of hard to get money out the door, right? It sounds nutty, but it is. And so states and localities are happy to spend that money and stabilize spending and stabilize economic activity. I don't know if we can count on that. I'm not banking on it. What we have been talking about is my other favorite policy, which is climate change. And the solution to climate change has always been putting a price on pollution, right? The reason we have too much pollution is because it's free to pollute. And if you can charge people to pollute, then we start thinking, oh, maybe I want to do less of that, right? It unlocks markets, it unlocks innovation to, you know, a greener, more energy efficient future. And that's awesome. That's what we want to do. One of the things that we can do with a carbon price we're learning is that it actually might be possible to bond that. So we start off at a carbon price low. And then what we're able to do though is we're able to say, okay, well, it's going to be low for a while and then it's going to increase. And so we can, as it increases, we can say, okay, well, we're going to borrow against these bond revenues and we can use that as a green recovery bond. That green recovery bond, the way that we're kind of looking through the legality of it, it can only be spent on like kind of green infrastructure stuff. But if we spend green recovery bond dollars on broadband, on infrastructure, on forest health, that releases general revenue funds that can be used for everything else. And so that kind of takes some pressure off of the budget in terms of what we'd be spending on, you know, programs that like the VSP program for agriculture, right? And like ways for farmers to do conservation work and other things that are kind of like fitting in the green bucket that people may not want to cut because they're investments, but that allows us to like kind of replace those revenues. So that's been my solution to it. I think we have a really great team across the House and the Senate. We're still working on solutions there, but I think it's really exciting to be able to, you know, hopefully get us out of this pandemic, make investments that get us out of the recession from the pandemic, make investments that benefit working people, that benefit rural areas. We saw with the last recovery, people in Seattle recovered pretty quickly. The rest of the state had a much longer recovery. And so making those targeted investments in infrastructure, in forest health, in broadband, which also counts as part of a green recovery bond, that can be a really crucial factor in making sure that this economic recovery is more broadly shared, that we're not leaving, you know, vulnerable groups behind as long, and it relieves that pressure on the general fund revenues.
Thank you. Now we are going to move into a segment where I'll allow others to ask follow-up questions to something you've said or to ask another question in the same area of the questions that were asked previously.
David, would you like to ask a question? I see. You unmute your line.
David, you're muted.
You're still muted, yeah. There you
You
go.
could have that down pat by now, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
What I was saying was, before I asked my question, I just wanted folks to know that before even her first primary, Sharon reached out and asked to learn of the latest and greatest in early learning, and it was a privilege to work with her then, and she's just been solid from the get-go, and so I really appreciate your leadership on many things related to early learning, including helping us get our new Northwest Center for Childcare Retention and Expansion launched in Whatcom County, which is already doing great things and helping get some of the CARES Act money on the streets, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm wondering, do you see that Northwest Center model as something that might be worth promoting through the state budget for expansion elsewhere in the state?
Yeah, honestly, David, I defer to you on that. The work that I do relies on smart local partners. So I'm hoping to see what we do with this, what we're able to create, what you're able to create with this. And my job is to take all this great information that you tell me and bring it to my fellow legislators. If this is successful, yeah, let's do more of it. I think everyone's going to want one.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, Sharon, do you want to just close with any, you have a closing thought or remark or something you'd like to just end our forum with?
Yeah, I just want to thank you guys all for being involved and being advocates for early learning. I have little kids, and I wish more parents of small children would run for office. Sometimes when you sit on all these committees, I think I'm the only woman with kids in preschool or maybe even elementary school in the legislature, but I could be wrong about that. I don't want to leave anyone out. Claire, correct me if I'm wrong. But it's been an interesting perspective. I remember sitting one day on the transportation committee and we were talking about like the future of transportation and ride shares and all that. And I raised my hand and I was like, well, I didn't raise my hand, we do our little thing. And I was like, what about car seats? What are you gonna do for that? Because when I've tried to take an Uber and had my kids with me, it's a disaster. It never works. I'm not willing to carry around these huge car seats that are super heavy. And they say that you can order them, but it's $10 per car seat per ride, which is just ridiculous for what would normally be an $8, trip to the airport. Now it's $28. But also when you try and call it, try getting two. Like it just like it's so it doesn't work. And so when we think about, every part of our government, especially transportation, we need to be thinking about the experience for everyone. We need to do more of a universal design. And we really only get that when we have people that are going through those experiences right now, right? When I raised my hand and I talked about car seats, all the people who had kids that were grown up were like, oh my gosh, yeah. But they hadn't been dealing with Uber since their kids were little because, their kids are all in high school now. And so, I could go on a rant about how cars should be designed to fit kids anyway. I'll leave you guys to think about that on your own. But I think it's just really important to be electing people who look like our communities. We have a lot of, a legislator is an easier job to do once you're retired and you're not in your prime earning years, which is about where I am. But I think it's really important to have those voices. I think it's really important to have Alicia Rule's running for the other seat, and she's a single mom with 3 kids, right? Like, I think that's just such a crucial voice to have right now in the legislature, to be thinking through that and thinking through those challenges. And how do we build a state where sometimes it's small accommodations that can actually make a really big difference between the quality of life, between equity, between whose voices are heard. That's my rant.
Yeah, well, that's a good rant. So I appreciate it. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us. And I think we're going to, oh, wait a minute. David, is that a high five? Okay, all right.
Hand clap.
I didn't know it was a hand clap. Thank you for joining us. And as we mentioned, we'll be distributing this widely in our community, of course, and we'll send you the link as well so you can disseminate it as you like. So, but thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.